Okay, folks, we're going to call the budget review meeting to order. Thank you all for being here. Good morning to everyone. Ms. Bowie, would you please call the roll? Present.
Melissa Mason.
Here.
Josie Barnhart.
Here.
Pat Bradford.
I'm here.
Stephanie Craybill.
Here.
Hugh McManus.
Here.
And Stephanie Walker.
Here.
All right. Thank you for being here once again. Good morning. If you're like me, you stayed up late and watched the Super Bowl to the very, very end and enjoyed that game. I wasn't, as I shared with several folks, I was a Steelers fan. I had my Steelers jersey on, but still, it was a good game to the end. So.
And I won $40.
Well, there you go. There you go. Ms. Graybill's buying lunch. I like that. So, very good. At this point, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
There's such a motion. Second?
Second.
The first and second, any discussion? If not, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. Passes 7-0. If you will, please join me as we pledge allegiance. I've asked Mr. McManus to lead that today.
Do you remember?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this point, I believe we're going to turn it over to Ms. Sutton. So we are running in. We have a lot to discuss today. So I'm going to let her take the lead. And before we start, Ms. Sutton, would you prefer if board members have questions to hold them to the end, or would it be better to, as they come up, to just raise a hand and kind of ask the question?
It would probably be helpful if you hold them, and then from time to time, I'll ask if you have any questions as we get through different sections, because there is a lot of information to cover today.
Okay, very good.
Whose order is this? Is this mine? Just for...
It is now.
Thank you. All right, just in case. So you have a handout at your seat, and so I'm going to start walking through that initially, and then we've got some other things that we'll hand out as we go through. So today we're going to talk about our revenue projections for next year. We're going to also share some salary and benefits information with you for next year and what those salary and benefit changes have been since 2020, so we can get a clear picture of the true impact that the state mandated changes related to salary and benefits have on our budget. Then we're going to talk about state allotments versus local investments, and then we'll have some budget discussions as the end, and of course throughout as we go we'll have those discussions. So looking forward to next year for our revenue, when we're looking at our state projected revenue, we are looking at having about $194.6 million in state funding. And that is going to be an increase for us of $8.8 million. And that increase is coming from raises and benefits. So we're projecting that the state's going to pass a budget with a 4% raise, and then also a 4% increase in health insurance, and that the retirement rate is going to stay the same. That $8.8 million is also a net, so I want to make sure I say that, because our student number enrollment did decline. So the state, we're projecting that they're going to, or we're estimating they're going to use second month of this year's enrollment for next year. And so based on that, we did have a reduction in enrollment. So when I say that the state is increasing $8.8 million, that's taken into account salaries, our raises, the benefits, and then also a reduction related to student enrollment. But the net of that is expected to be an increase of $8.8 million. Now, as we look through our revenue, looking at county appropriation. So we know that the state funds us based on our student enrollment. And like I said, that enrollment went down compared to last year. So we would assume that the county is going to decrease our funding based on that enrollment change. And so the enrollment change, it decreased based on ADM, about 1.5 million would be the dollar impact that that would have on our budget. Compared to what the county funded this year, it's a reduction of about 400 students. And then we also have a reduction in charter schools. So remember, the county also provides the funding to us, which then we in turn provide to the charter schools. So their enrollment went down as well. So we're looking at an impact of about 100,000 related to charter schools. So that will be a reduction coming from the county as well for their appropriation. Fines and forfeitures, we're projecting 1.7 million. That's a little bit lower than this past year, but it's consistent with over the past 3 years what we've collected in fines and forfeitures. So that's going to be our plan going into next year. And then, of course, if fines and forfeitures aren't always consistent, so if more revenue comes in, of course, we'll budget that revenue if it comes in, but just for our budget at this time. Before we move on, are there any questions related to revenue or revenue projections?
Grego?
Yes.
Yes. So about how much do we get per month, if there is even a way to estimate that, on fines and forfeitures?
It's not really consistent throughout the year, so looking at over the past 3 years, it usually ranges between 1.6 million and 2 million, looking at it as a year, yes. But it's not very consistent. Usually we get more in the spring than we do at the beginning of the year.
So may I follow up? So if we miss a hearing or miss something, and we miss on a fines and forfeiture, are we allowed to go back and try and reclaim that, or if we miss, we miss?
So the attorney actually helps us with the fines and forfeitures through the courthouse, so my understanding is we would be able to go back. I mean, the attorney helps us with that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, Ms. Walker?
So Ashley, you talked the last time about the fact that when they do a raise that we don't always get the benefit side of that increase as well, but it says here insurance rate increase. Does that mean the state is going to give us a 7% increase for health insurance as well?
Oh, so yes, so normally the state does provide revenue to go along with their mandated raise and the benefits. Now, there are some cases where because we pay higher than the state average salary, it doesn't 100% cover everything, but for the most part, they cover the raises and the benefits that they mandate.
Okay, mandate, okay, thank you.
And I'll follow up on that question. So, but if for the local positions we pay for, they don't pay for anything.
No.
So we have to find the money to do the health insurance and all those salary increase.
Right.
That has to come out of local funds only.
That's true, and they also don't pay for federal. So any federal funding that we receive, it's just whatever those federal grants give us. So if there's raises in addition to that, then you would have to have reductions or find some other way to cut in those areas.
And refresh my memory, how many positions do we fund locally, about approximately?
So it's about 800 altogether. About 800.
Okay, about 800 positions. Ms. Barnhart, do you have a question?
Yes, I was going to ask, in conversations with our county commissioners, is that something that we can help them propose and reconsider? How the state they do ADM, but they also give that increase of when they do raises. So if that's something that we can mirror on the county level versus just a straight ADM?
So I think that's a board discussion item.
Right, but that's something that we can come together and have a conversation to discuss with them. Okay,
The board.
right.
So you may not be able to answer this, but we get our funding from ADM, but Brunswick does not. Is that a locally decided decision from the school boards, whether we ask for a certain percentage or not?
So I think that's just what Ms. Barnhart was just referring to as well, is some different type of agreement, but of course, that would be something the boards would need to come together on.
We say Brunswick does like 34% of their,
36.5,
I'm sorry?
36.5%.
Yeah, so I guess we don't know what that looks like for New Hanover if we decided to do something like that. Could we work up some numbers like that? Is it possible?
Yeah.
If we're going to go into discussion, maybe?
Yep. And it's
Mr.
my
McManus?
understanding, oh, sorry.
That's right. Just a question, 800 local positions that are paid.
Approximately.
Roughly how many of those are classroom or teacher positions? Because that includes all staff, other staff that are local.
Teachers, I want to say it's 168, but there are other certified positions in there as well, and I'm not sure of those numbers.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can you had mentioned the federal wasn't covered. Approximately how many positions would that affect? I know it comes out of grants and this, that, and the other, but how many positions are we talking about?
I don't have that with me right now.
Ms. Craybill?
Yeah, back to Ms. Walker's point is that that's not something that the school, from my understanding in Brunswick County, that's not something that the school board decides. It's the county commissioners have decided that that is their best funding strategy. And the school board just, kind of takes it or does not. Yeah.
Anybody else? One more? No? Please carry on.
Okay, so as we've talked about before, our operating budget is $334 million, that's this year. And that, if we just look at state and local, that makes up $287 million of that budget, which is about 86%. So today, we're going to be focused on local and state funding. And we are still working on trying to finalize budgets for our federal grants. And so we will bring that back at a later time. But when you're looking at that operating budget, we talked about before, 81% of that operating budget is benefits and salaries. So I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as we're going through and looking at the information for this year's budget, or looking at next year's budget. So one of the things I thought it would be helpful to include today would be sharing with you the impact that changes to state mandated changes to salaries and benefits can have on our local budget. And so I wanted to share with you the increases since 2020. And so in 2020 through 2021, there were average salary increases of 2.5%. The retirement rate increased from 19.86% to 21.68%. Health insurance per employee increased from $6,306 to $6,326. In fiscal year 22, so that's 2021, 2022, you saw some additional increases. So raises were 2.5% on average that year. The retirement rate continued to go up, so that year it went up to 22.89%. And then health insurance also went up again to $7,019, and so that's per employee, it's the annual cost. In fiscal year 23, we had another raise of 4% on average. Retirement went up again to 25.5%, and health insurance increased for our employees. Once again, it went up to $7,397 per employee annually. And then going into this year, we had another salary increase of 4%. Retirement rate increased again to 25.02%, and health insurance also increased again to $7,557 per employee. And as we look forward, we talked about earlier this morning, looking forward to next year, we're looking at another 4% on average increase with, as of right now, based on the biennial state budget, the retirement rate's going to stay the same, so we're kind of crossing our fingers for that. So that stays the same at the 25.02%. And then health insurance is expected to increase once again next year to $8,095 per employee annually. So now that we've gone through the numbers, let's think about the impact that has on our budget. So a first-year teacher in fiscal year 2020, they would have made $35,000 a year. They would have gotten a local supplement of $3,000. And so with Social Security, retirement, health insurance for that employee, we would have budgeted $34,759 for that one employee. $54,759.80 for that one employee. Thank you, Chris. Now, looking forward to next year, a beginning teacher now is going to make $41,000 annually. During that time frame, we also increased our local supplement by $7,000. I'm sorry, $4,000 to get up to $7,000. And so the total salary is $48,000. And then when you add in the Social Security, retirement, health insurance, we would need to budget $776.60 for that same employee. So when you look at that increase, you're looking at an increase for that employee of $17,000 from 2020 to next year. And so just think about that. If you had 80 locally funded positions, you would have needed an increase in revenue of $1.3 million for those 80 positions. So it's just when you're not getting additional revenue in because your enrollment is staying either consistent or it's declining, and you have mandated benefits and salary raises, it has a huge impact on your budget. Are there any questions about that before I move on?
Mr. McManus?
Just want to make sure I understand this correctly, which I think I do. So since 220, not including 24, 25, it's been a 13% increase,
Yes.
of which we have 800 local employees. And so the public understands that we have to match that. And most people don't realize, again, I'm saying it because anyone who's watching needs to hear this, we also have Social Security, retirement, and health benefits. Most people don't realize that we pay all that. That's 800 employees.
Yeah.
That's
Mr. Booker. And to piggyback on what Mr. McManus said, during that time, that teacher's pay went up $10,000, but their benefits went up $7,000. And they don't see that. No employee ever thinks, oh, I got another $7,000 in benefits, but it's a hard cost.
And it's my understanding that we try to pay, the beginning teachers out of the local funds instead of the more experienced teachers because their salaries are a lot higher. Is that correct?
And that is correct. Because the state gives us position allotments, which means they will fund X number of positions no matter the cost. That's the reason we want to pay them out of those funds. And then we pay lower paid teachers out of local. However, as you might recall, over the past couple of years, and this is true for next year as well, your low paid teachers are the ones getting the bigger raises. And so for next year, for example, your higher paid teacher are going to get like a 1 or 2% raise, but I think it's your first year or second year teachers are going to get a 7% raise. So that higher raise is going to impact our local budget because that's where we're paying our lower paid teachers from.
And just to clarify, the locally paid teachers on this chart is an example, right? Because you said
Yes,
80.
this is just, so the 80, this is just an example.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Anybody else?
Okay.
Ashley, is there any category of teachers where our teacher category stayed the same and yet our student population that those teachers serve has gone up?
Our teacher categories stay the same?
I guess when I'm thinking of teacher categories, I'm thinking of like our instructional coaches, our EC teachers, our AIG teachers. And I'm just asking, is that a valid question to ask? Where if we increase our number of students, then we should increase our number of teachers. I mean, I'm just talking out loud.
Well, and that's a great question, but I think I can help Ashley with that one. Because the raises that go into, that the state votes on, we want people to get a raise. I mean, we're not refuting that portion. The benefits that continue to increase. So no one actually stays the same. And so it doesn't matter where you fall at the state level. Everyone gets an increase. It just depends on how much of an increase.
Yeah, so you didn't really answer the question I was thinking in my mind. I mean, I understand what you're saying, got that down. I was just, I guess what I'm thinking of is more our EC teachers. You know, have we had, and that's one of those categories where the services that the students get, there is no set because our students are all different and have different plans. So I was just curious if there was, if we'd had like an increase of EC students, and do we need an increase in teachers that the state doesn't give us? And I don't know what that allotment looks like, you know. Like, do we get an allotment based on, no? Okay.
I can give a specific example that may help answer that
Okay.
question. The state will cap you at a certain number, a certain amount. For AIG is one of the other ones you
Yes.
mentioned. The state will fund us based on 4% of our ADM, regardless of how many
Okay.
AIG students we have. It caps out. And I know that the EC has a similar threshold of how much they will provide.
You're going
Yeah.
to see this soon.
We are,
So
okay.
yes,
So
Chris is
hold the
going,
question,
Dr.
okay.
Barnes is going to show
No
this.
problem, okay.
Yeah.
So
And I think
I'm
that'll-
actually
that'll-
Okay.
gonna let Chris hand out some information, and he's gonna go over state allotments versus local investments. And so I think it's gonna answer some of those questions. But I will add while he's handing those out, that, you know, we do get funding for EC students, the AIG students, like Chris mentioned, the multilanguage ML students, and, you know, that funding may not be sufficient based on the number of kids that are in our district.
Okay,
Because
I think that's what I was getting at.
it lags, like the head count is usually from the previous year, so if we have more kids that come in, then we may not necessarily get funding for those kids until the next year.
Gotcha. That helps, thanks.
Other questions? Okay. Sure.
I think Chris was gonna try to give you guys about 3 minutes just to look over that handout that he's giving out, and then he'll take some time to go through it with you.
So initially, just wanted to give you an overview of what you're looking at. The small sheet of paper is sort of our analysis of average salaries for different job types that we have in our district. Just pick some of the largest ones. So you can see there the local investment versus the salary in this one. In this larger one, you will see the blue tabs or the blue columns are what the state approves as an allotment for certain types of jobs that we have directly in our schools. The green section is what we actually have. So I'll just let you kind of go through and glance at this, and then on the back you see middle and high school, just to give you an assessment of what you're looking at.
Did I get two?
You got two just because I'm being nice, but I did realize it back.
Okay, thank you.
Green is what we actually have. Did they get 2 copies maximum?
Did,
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
last question. weren't we going, we talked about maybe denoting those that were ESSER positions so that we could realize,
We're not there yet.
Yeah, we're still working through some of
okay,
it, so I just
okay.
wanted- If you want to jot down any notes or questions you have, that might help the process along.
I gotta give you a question. You said, what are they?
The size is like, so CRA like has like 63 students or 80 students.
What happens is because it's like you have to have certification.
And these teacher allotments are based on student enrollment.
Yeah, I'll go over that. So just to bring you guys back a couple of key points. I think what we need to remember every day is that these are people's livelihoods, jobs, and careers we're talking about. So when Ashley and I are working on trying to make sure all this fits, we have to realize that we're actually talking about people here as well. And that's, we've talked about the hiring freeze, we've talked about some other things about why we need to give as much time for natural attrition to occur as possible. But to start with, obviously you see here, and we've talked about this a lot, but the investment the district makes in its employees is different from the salary that they take home. And significantly different, as Ashley pointed out, the amount of retirement goes up every year, insurance goes up every year. And so we have a vehicle, and for anybody watching at home, there is a way for you to look at your total district investment in you as an employee through the Munis system that you can get through the self-serve. And we're thinking about sending out something for everyone to be able to access that. But it is a way for you to be able to see how much is the district investing in me as an employee, because it is different than the salary they take home. So these are just an example of every time you have an employee on a local salary structure, we have to pay these amounts, which gets significantly higher every year. So on the next side, if you look at we're going to dig into this slide, this here, and you have elementary on the front and middle and high is on the back. I've been doing this HR work for about a decade now, and the state has not changed their allotment formulas in all the time that I've been doing this. Even back when I was a principal, I would look and see, because I always wanted to have a little check and balance to make sure I was getting my due when I was a principal. And they have not changed. I went away to Nashville thinking they'd get it fixed. When I came back, and it's still the same thing. So I wanted to sort of run down the columns first to make sure they make sense, and then whatever questions you guys have. Anything that jumps out first, or are you guys good to jump in?
Any questions?
Okay. To make it more complex, the state allots some positions by position. They allot some by months of employment, and they allot some by dollar amount. So I've tried to translate everything into a position for you so it just makes a little more sense here. On the first column, you see state AP allotment and then current AP state, or current AP staff, excuse me. On the blue column on the far left, you will see what the state allots for each of our schools for an assistant principal. Now, obviously, you know that some schools can't have 0.32 of an AP. So we have our own local formula that allots how many APs go where, because they obviously only come to us in full buckets. You know, you can't split somebody into thirds or half or anything like that. So if you look down at the bottom of this column, you'll see that the state feels like 9 1/4 assistant principals is sufficient for every elementary school in our district. Of course, we don't necessarily feel that way. We have 22 in our elementary schools. Several of our most critical schools have 2, some have 0, and most of them have 1. But you can see obviously the wide berth between those 2 numbers. And if you flip on to the back page, you'll see that the state assistant principal allotment for middle schools is about 4.5, which would mean some of our middle schools get 0, and all of them, the others would get 1. We, of course, have 16. We have 2 at every location. International School at Gregory has 1, and then Williston has 3 for a total of 16. And again, you can see a wide range between what the state allots and what we have. And then high school, I know that Mr. McManus, you were at Laney, correct, sir, or was it Hoggard? Hoggard? Sorry.
Well, I like all of them, I was at Hanover.
Well, you like all of them.
Let me scrape him up off the floor.
You love all your
No,
children
we
the same,
scrape him
right?
up off the floor.
But you can see that the state would allot 7.5 assistant principals for all of our high schools. While we have, don't have any at our non-traditional high schools, we do have 4 at our large traditional schools, which makes obviously 16. And so you can see a grand total that the state would fund us about 21.25 assistant principals, and we currently have 56. All 34 or 35 of those have to get shifted to local because that's the only way to pay for them. Okay. So if you'll go back up again to the front of your page, you can see the state teacher allotment and then our current teaching staff at our elementary schools. Now that number is a little different. The state would allot a little more for elementary, but because the state allows you to go 3 above the state offering, so they fund 1 teacher for every 18 kindergartners. Well, sometimes we have 3 in a class or 4 in a class, depending on how many teachers there are. So that number works out to be a little bit different. Sometimes you can go up to 3 over what the state allots in elementary school for class size. They're a little bit larger. But they also, you can see if you go laterally across the sheet, they don't get the same amount of everything else. So you can see it's sort of a check and balance. If you look on the back side, you'll see the middle school teacher allotment is about 24 off, and that's almost exactly the number that we allocated for enrichments for middle school. The state had originally, Ashley has spoken about, the state had originally planned to provide a middle school enrichment formula. They chose not to, but we had those people already in place. And then in high school, you'll see the most dramatic change between the number of teachers that they allot. Sir,
Can you tell them what an enrichment teacher is?
I'm sorry, enrichment is, in elementary school, enrichment is art, music, and PE. And then in middle and high school, it's any sort of course like chorus or art or music, anything that's not CTE related sort of goes under PE, weight training, all those go under enrichment. The middle school and high school don't get an allotment for enrichments at all. You are supposed to fund that out of your normal teacher allotment. What you can see in middle school, that number is almost exactly the same, that we front-loaded some of our middle schools enrichment people thinking that the state was going to fund that. They chose not to. In high school, you see the biggest discrepancy. The state would say that all 8 of our high schools can run with 240 teachers. However, we have numerous programs that we know are benefiting students. IB, AP, Lyceum. There are a lot of different programs we have, plus we want to have a wide variety of offerings. When you do that, scheduling is so critical in making sure you have the right number of teachers. So we have to kind of overload a little bit at the high school in the teaching allotment. Okay. Everybody good? All right, we're going to go back to the third column down. Yes, ma'am.
So the, let's say, like, if a principal has to choose between having an English teacher or a French teacher, is that what we're kind of talking about in here?
For the most part, what we do is the district doesn't school by school these allotments. The district says you have 1,000 teachers, here you go. And we have to allocate them by school where they are most fit. Normally, we would give the high schools, here's your allotment of teachers based on your breakdown of number of students and grade level. And then we'll do just sort of a back channel and make sure between Julie and Patrice and myself to make sure that there is the proper number of offerings. You know, sometimes I think the biggest thing to analyze is if you have a class that's too small, you have to determine if we need to offer it in that way or not, or maybe only offer it once instead of, you know, it's a very delicate balance.
departments. You
So
also need,
an example of that, and so when you run into these numbers at the high school because of those programs, for instance, you may have, I'm gonna make this up, like if you have AP zoology, you're offering the course, but there may only be 10 kids in it. So that's a teacher position where that's a science class, then your biology class may have more students in it because you took a science position to do your AP zoology.
Okay.
and like you saw last week, I sent you folks sort of an analysis of class sizes. We actually have to mandate and review class sizes twice a year for K through third grade to meet the legislation for class sizes. At that same time, we do like a high school run just to do a check on sizes there as well.
Mr. McManus, then Ms. Walker.
Can you explain the funding to me at Hoggard for IB and the average class size? Because it's very expensive, I know, from the ground up.
It is.
Yearly.
I don't have those numbers committed to memory. But yes, it's like an additional program where that's where it goes down to, we have to have teachers who teach ID. So that program, so that's not included in the state, that's all local funding. But we can definitely pull those out so that you can see the funding and how that works for it.
Ms. Walker?
Thank you. So this is basically just a funding explanation. So all these that say NA on TA and current TA staff, and go all the way to the bottom, I mean, we actually do have staff in those positions. It's just they're not funded on the high school and middle school level.
If you're okay, can I answer that question when we get to that section?
Sure, don't forget, because I'm not.
I won't.
Anyone else?
Because TA is honestly the most confusing thing to allocate, and so I'll remember to speak
You
to
got
that.
enrichment too, that doesn't have anything.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to that as well. So the next column over is the state instructional support allotment. And when I said earlier that the state has not changed their allotment formula in the last 10 years, I forgot to mention that it's gotten worse in one area specifically. And that is in the state instructional allotment. I gave you in this regard what we have right now. Next year's actually gets worse than it is right now. So right now, they will allot one support instructional teacher, one support person, for every 210 kids there are in the school.
Can you give an example of what that
Yes.
position? So they-
Yeah, so that instructional allotment includes these kinds of teachers, okay? Media coordinator, counselor, social worker, instructional coach. So those 4 types are called instructional support.
What was the first one again?
Media coordinator, guidance counselor, social worker, and instructional coach. So if you look at the first school on the list, Snipes, has just a hair under 400 students. They earn 1 3/4, 1.75 of those 4 things I just described. So if we were allocating specifically to the state formula, they would have to choose between a counselor, a media coordinator, a social worker, or an instructional coach. They could not afford all 4 of them. In fact, none of our elementary schools, based on their allotments, even can get all 4 of those through the state allotment. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to, some of the schools that are Title I where they have additional funding?
Now, there is one thing, and I didn't want to dive too deep, but there is something called supplanting versus supplementing. So a school can't use their Title I dollars to get something that I'm giving to another school. So an example would be, I can't say to a Title I school, well, I'm going to give I don't have enough counselors, so I'm going to give one counselor Ogden, you can pay for your own out of Title I. We have to give everybody the same amount, and then they can add to that if they want to. So some schools, like our Title I schools, may get an extra instructional coach. I know a couple that fund a second counselor, but that's because we have to give them all the same. And so typically right now what we provide, and you'll see most of those numbers hover around 4, we provide a counselor, a media coordinator, and an instructional coach at every elementary school. And currently, most of our schools receive a full-time social worker, although we are working that down to half in several places. So you can see that. Yes, ma'am.
Say that again?
Right now, we fund an instructional coach out of ESSER now, let me make it clear, a guidance counselor, and a media coordinator for every elementary school. Our instructional coaches are out of ESSER. In the high schools and the middle schools, there are more counselors, there are more social workers there, so I'll get to that when we flip over. Good? All right, if you flip over, you'll see in our middle schools, we provide 2 counselors, and there is a third one at Holly Shelter and at Williston. They all also have an instructional coach. They also all have a media coordinator. And then any place that you see a number that's different from that, usually that is funded out of a different pot of money. And then high schools, obviously, you can see there as well. So at the grand total at the bottom, the state would fund us 118 of those types of people. We have 203. Okay, now let me explain the TA thing if we can go back. And Julie referenced one thing I want to make sure I say to you as well. The state EC allotment is a separate funding abnormality. I did not include EC teachers in this or ECTAs. I just looked at the things that we allot through the state allotment. The EC is its own animal. So when you're looking at this, you're not going to see the EC teachers or the ECTAs in this model that I'm showing you. What you're seeing here for TA is the state will approve or will fund. Now you're going to want to get your pens ready for this part, folks. Okay, the state will fund TAs for kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. Sounds great? That's no problem. However, they will only fund 2 TAs for every 3 kindergarten classes, 1 TA for every 2 1st and 2nd grade classes, and 1 TA for every 3 3rd grade classes. Okay, we can still get our head around that. Oh, but the state only qualifies a full class as having 21 students in it, even though they allot it at a different number. So basically you have to take the number of kids that you have in kindergarten, divide it by 21, and then multiply it by 2/3 to find out your kindergarten TAs. For 1st and 2nd grade, you take the full number of kids in your 2nd grade or your 1st grade, you divide it by 21, then you multiply it by 1/2, and you do 1/3 for 3rd grade. But we're still not done yet. Then they take that number and calculate it against the average TA salary in the state, and then provide you that number in a dollar amount. So it's not done by position, it's done by dollars. So I've equated it to a position number here for you, but understand that our TAs make $1 more an hour at least than the state's average, several dollars more. So the dollar amount they send us, then you can have 175, we only can really have 160 because we pay ours at a higher rate. So what you can see here is the TA allotment, what the state would allow and what we currently have. And this is where we're fairly balanced in our regular TA allotment. But it doesn't apply to your middle schools and your high schools have an ISS TA, basically. Those are all funded locally as well. Generally, all the TAs that you normally will see in middle and high school are in the EC program. Okay, and the final column, and that's why you see NA out in middle and high school. Probably got more than you wanted to, Ms. Walker. Did that answer your question, though?
No, I'm trying to get it all written down.
I think Ms. Barnhart had a question too.
Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna ask, I know you said the ECTAs and teachers are not in here. Does that include like our speech pathologists and?
Yes, they are-
So
they
those
are
are not
funded separately.
included, okay. So they would not be, as far as the allotment, instructional support based on the state level?
They're not qualified as instructional support to
Okay.
the state either. No, ma'am.
Thank you.
The last one is probably the easiest one to absorb. The state will fund 1 enrichment, art, music, PE, for K-5 students only, at the rate of 1 for every 191 students.
One more time.
1 for every 191 students. So as you can imagine, looking down there, you see that the state funds 57. A year ago, we had 75. And this is why we elected to start sharing in some of our smaller schools, simply because the state does not keep up with the needs of the district. So all this to show you, and then of course, you can say, well, Dr. Barnes, how come there's no enrichment staff for middle and high school? The state doesn't fund it at all in middle and high school. You're supposed to make do with the allotment they give you for class sizes. So we've talked a lot about the state funds us over here. We currently are staffed over here. Somewhere, the discussion is about what's in the middle, okay? With the funding resources we have, we cannot continue to fund without at least being aware of where the state's going to limit us. And there's a certain amount that we just can't continue to, the state has not kept up with what we feel like our district needs are. So somewhere in the middle is where we have to end up landing. Because again, going back to what Ashley said, 80% of our operating budget is salaries and benefits.
Ms. Walker?
Are we ready for another question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, then, I guess the question is, how many enrichment teachers in middle and high school do we fund locally if the state does not provide any funding?
Gosh, I've got that.
I don't have that off the top of my head.
It gets a little, it gets a little messy because sometimes you pay off the state dollar or whatever. I'll get that number for you, I just don't have it off the top of my head.
I mean, it's important to know.
I can get it for you, I just need to sit down and do some math. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
I'm formulating something in my head. The thing that gets the most attention from families is, you need a coordinator, your instructional coach, your guidance counselor, and your social worker. And next to that would be your enrichment with your arts, music, PE, and so on. And so the state doesn't fund us to have those things. My question, I guess, is going to be, what do the other counties do? Does anybody know? How do we rank with our neighbors, just out of curiosity?
I can speak to the other places that I've been.
Okay.
So I've been in four other North Carolina counties as a principal or as in this position. I was in I want to say, not affluent county when I was a principal, and you got the state allotment. And luckily I had Title I, so I was able to balance some of those. But the state was intended, all the way back to the beginning of the state charter, the state intended that the district fund all of its local schools. That was the state's requirement. During the Depression, they realized that counties just could not keep up with what was important. So they set up a plan where the state would fund your positions, and your local budget would be for capital projects and operating expenses. However, in the last 100 years or so, you've seen that the needs of the schools have increased so dramatically that almost every district puts some portion of its local dollars over into salaries simply because we have to. Because look at, if you just ran down the blue columns, you could see what it would be like to be in a school. So does that answer your question? So I've been in a district where all the high school classes were over 30. I've been in districts where all the 4th and 5th grade classes were over 30.
What about specials though?
Ma'am?
She was talking about specials too, like what do they do for?
Right,
So
well,
let
that's
me
how
help-
they
let
fund
me-
their specials is
Let me help you.
Sorry,
So
give
what
it a shot.
typically happens is that, I think the question was, the media specialists, all those other, are, like, when you think of, I think what your question was, that parents deem that important. Well, they're all important because at a high school and a middle school, you can't create your schedule if you don't have we call them the elective courses. Your schedule won't fall because it can't stay in core courses all day. So you have to have some. What happens in some districts is they share. So not everyone gets a nurse, not everyone gets a social worker. And so that's what happens. I think what we have to focus more on is because of the increases in retirement benefits, that's what has eaten up our budget. And so you have the employees, but then, and it was working, like that works, before these large increases took place. So we have to, as he was stating earlier, how do we get back to center where we are able to live within the means? Each year I was saying, we're living a little bit outside of the means, So now what do we do? And I think that's where we go, because honestly, each district will look differently. And it's hard to compare our district to a District B, a District C, or whatever, because everyone does something differently. And those nuances are what make each district who they are.
Most of the places will increase class sizes to provide a little more flexibility. So class sizes are higher so that you can pay for a social worker. I've been in a district where there was one social worker for the entire district. I've been in schools where I was the instructional coach. It was scary then too. Yes.
Julie's face
Yeah.
over there, Julie.
Ms. Barnhart?
So I know last year, one of the things that we did is the ISS coordinators at middle school and high school, they did not have to be a certified teacher.
Correct.
We bumped them down to a TA, so that was a cost-saving things for us, but we were able to still operate that functionality. Are there things like that that we can do and have be a classified staff label versus a certified staff, that we could save some positions and also cut some of the amount of funding that we're spending on in there? I don't know if the answer is yes, or if we gotta look into that
We
more.
haven't done that analysis
Okay,
yet.
okay.
That, he can't answer that one, and I don't want him to answer it off the cuff, because that's more of Ashley, and Chris is
Okay.
getting too far out in the river, so we need to bring him back into his
Okay, sorry.
presentation.
I think the core of this is if a teacher costs 30% more than they did 5 years ago, and we're not getting more funding, we have to find a way to balance.
Right.
Ms. Walker?
I just want to ask a follow-up question. I mean, it's clear we have different needs, so the state allotment is not adequate. I mean, we can't go down to the state allotment, we just can't. I don't see how we can do that. And clearly, if we have them, they are needed, and I don't think it's realistic to believe that we can go to the state.
And I'm not advocating that we do. Please know that I've had the same arguments with legislators for the last 10 years that this is an anemic schedule. But I do see that, somewhere from where they start us and where we are is sort of the discussion.
And so also the purpose of his presentation was to show you the state versus us, like what they're actually saying that they can give, and anything above and beyond is literally coming through local funding. It's not, there's no recommendation to say we have to, because to see, so for instance, like if you look at the secondary column for teacher allotment, we're at 241 teachers, and that's what the state allots, and then right here, we allot 331. That would be a nightmare to say that you're gonna have to take it all the way down to bare bones and skeleton. That's by no means, but what we are saying, Ashley, at this point, right where we are in the presentation, is for you to go back and look at the district investment and how much we have to pay for local, and then looking at what the benefit package is that we actually pay. That's all we are. We're not actually at a point where we're saying you have to do the X or Y. This is more information gathering so that you will understand. We're gonna have to have a few more budget sessions, work sessions with you before we can literally drill all the way down, because it's a lot, and I know it's a lot. And that's why I told them, you've gotta take it slow. I want them not to use the HR terminology. That's why I keep telling them to go.
I was
explain what that
trying.
means. And I'm like, Chris, you're up here and you've got to come all the way down. He's like, I said, no, you've got to come all the way down. And Ashley can't use the CFO language because I get what they're talking about, but I need for you to understand what they're talking about. So that's what
I feel like I get it. I feel like I'm not happy with it.
they can go even
I get
higher,
it.
believe me. They,
And we're not, it's very complex. And as we go through this,
please don't tell them.
she's required to balance the budget. I'm required to make sure that our people are valued and taken care of. And between those two things is where we have to match. And it's difficult conversations.
And I have a question for Ms. Bradford, but I just want to throw in one quick, like I said, I retired not too long ago from another county very close to here, and we actually had one social worker that was for every single elementary school. We saw her once every month. And she worked hard and, tried to do everything she could possibly do, but, the counselor and the assistant principal and the principal all had to kind of put their social worker hats on and do some of that job. So, Ms. Bradford?
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the whole big picture. I'm way up here. And our teachers in North Carolina are paid well, according to the state of North Carolina, at the highest rates. We're number one in business according to all the, the experts. Our state is number one in business. We're not a poor county. I'm not sure people realize that we can't have all the things we want because the state doesn't allot it. So that's a situation for the legislative committee to work. But at the same time, I just can't imagine that the county wouldn't take this into consideration if it could be explained to where the average little brain could pick it up. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around that aspect of it, that we only get so many positions from the state, and somebody has to pick up the difference, or we have to cut all the things that everybody wants to keep. Am I right? Is that the bottom line here?
Well, I don't ever want to say that any one of the human beings that are working here are not working every single day as hard as they can.
Yeah.
This isn't a question about, heck, we could cut 50 and it wouldn't hit a bit. This is hard to decide, and I think that everyone's working as hard as they can. I do know that there are some variables to living in Wilmington that are different. Mm-hmm. The average cost of a home is $100,000 over the state average for a home. So I don't know if they're overpaid is the word I would use, but I do know that we want to invest in our employees the best.
I didn't say overpaid. I said they say that we've got the highest paid teachers, and that argument is argued we have the highest paid teachers. So I'm just trying to find where the discrepancy, disconnect, whatever.
Well, I think that reflects back to the state's investment in employees as well.
I think Ms. Farm has something there, Mr. McManus.
Yeah, I just want to bring your attention to, while we're looking at the differences in what the state provides and what we're able to provide as a district, or have been able to provide as a district, when we look at EC positions and our, as Chris mentioned, kind of the convoluted funding formula that we have for EC and how we establish those class FTEs, the full-time equivalent, how many teachers does it require to implement these IEPs? We have that same dilemma where we have provided, we've not increased our number of EC teachers, but our number of students with EC needs has increased a little bit. But as we're looking at falling off of the same kind of cliff, we've got IEP mandated services. So I encourage, as we're looking at this global process, looking at it in big picture, we've got to make sure that we leave enough room also in this work so that EC can have some local support as we're trying to cover those federally mandated IEPs. We have to. That's not where we really want to, it's we have to. And that includes high-cost kids, too.
Mr. McManus?
Well, I feel very comfortable that we all have been very aggressive in trying to provide for everybody, every school, and most importantly, attract the best possible staff, starting with the county commissioners and that tremendous supplement. And if I remember again, we said it, but I want to say it again, we're close to $10,000 more that we give to teachers here to attract them. And then COVID and the ESSER funds. So we got a big deposit. We wanted to make sure, I remember we focused on mental health and social workers, counselors, where we needed, lower performing schools. Now they're gone. And what bothers me is, I'll say it, we've got to cut. So that's the hardest thing in the world. So at some point, I'm not saying anything you haven't thought about, we've got to prioritize. But I think we need to involve the administration in each school to help us prioritize. So it's not just the board that says school X or school Z is going to lose or whatever. We need to involve them, and at some point, having been in that situation a few times, they may have to make the call in their own school because they know who knows best, but the leading administration of what they can live and not live with, or what they can combine. So I just feel like they need to be participatory in this whole discussion.
So I may be able to speak to that as well. So we've done back-to-back sessions with the principals at the last principals meeting.
Thank you.
And also brought them into a way to give us feedback. into what is your priority to keep in your building and what is your priority that you could learn to manage with. And so we've already garnered all of that, and that'll be built into the budget.
We're gonna get slammed, there's no doubt about it when we do this, and for all the right reasons, I understand. But the administration is responsible for their school, and we need to make sure they have input, so that at least we listen and
Yep.
try as
And
best we
we
possibly.
agree, that was the first thing we did, was to get their input.
Ms. Barnhart?
My question is, and I don't think there's an answer right now, but when we're looking at these supplementary supports, like our social workers and counselors, is there a way that we can partner with the community and have MOUs? And it's not on our books that we're paying, but they're having access to the services at our schools. And so that might be a bigger conversation that when talking with the county, they might have some support staff that they can say would be housed at different things so that our students are getting support, but then it's not, we don't have the allotment for it, but we want to continue to provide that. What would that look like potentially as an opportunity? Like I said, I don't think that's an answer right now, but I think it's something that we should look into to alleviate some of that, knowing that we're gonna have to cut to say, can we still have it? It's just not on our books.
Ms. Walker?
That's pretty much all the
Well,
knowledge I
that's
have.
called capacity, and I think they're doing a lot already in this community, and I think if we cut a lot more, they're gonna have to. I mean, they don't have to. Let's hope they do. But I would just say to Mr. McManus' points, you know, we're gonna get slammed, but I mean, we can't magic money. So I think it's the folks that are giving us money that has to be paying attention to this, and hopefully they are.
Yeah.
Because we just can't, we don't have a money tree, so.
You've exceeded my available amount of knowledge, sir. I'm going to call Ashley back up.
But you said
Go ahead.
that from 20 to now, 30% increase.
The number of,
Plus or
the
minus.
cost of insurance, the cost of benefits has increased dramatically.
And that's major, that's absolutely major.
Okay, so you have available to you position change summary sheet. I've passed out. So this is some information we've shared previously. The numbers have changed a little bit. And just keep in mind that this is going to continue to change because we're still trying to identify all we're still trying to identify items to help us balance our budget. So as you're looking on this list, I know there have been some changes, some adjustments, like when you're looking at the EC positions were a little bit different than what we had looked at before. One thing to keep in mind is, once again, this chart is only state and local. I did include ESSER funding because we knew that was going away, but like I said before, we're still working on those federal budgets, and so EC is liable to change again. We're still trying to nail down what those numbers are going to look like, taking into account the federal funding. So we still have some work to do here, but I wanted to give you an update as to where we are at this point, so you can be looking at that and be able to ask questions if you have questions. I've included or marked next to certain items if they were ESSER funded, so you would have that information. So those are the items that we had talked about before that were going away because the funding is going away. And then you also have the adjustment, like I said before, student enrollment's going down, so we have to adjust for that revenue decrease, so that's captured here as well. So we're still $10 million short from where we need to be, but with these items, we were able to offset the loss of ESSER revenue funding and also to be able to provide funding for the 4% raise in the benefit increases that we talked about before. But we're still looking to try to recover the fund balance that we used this year because we won't have that to use next year.
I'm going to ask a quick question on ESSER. Just, we said it before, but I want to hear it one more time. When those folks were hired, they were hired with the understanding that their position may go away.
Yes, that's correct.
And same thing, I think I've asked this one before, we're still $10 million short if all of this was done and that 10 is the ESSER money. I mean, the media's talking about we have a $10 million shortfall, when really, we have a $20 million shortfall.
Right,
Okay, just
Right.
want to double check.
yep.
Ms. Mason?
You mentioned the change for EC. Do you think those numbers, like, if you had to guess, would increase or decrease?
I'm thinking they might increase. I don't think
As
they'll
far as-
decrease.
As not retaining?
I think it would be an increase in the number of the reduction.
Okay.
So less cuts in EC.
More.
More cuts.
More.
But I don't know what those numbers are at this point, so I didn't feel comfortable saying that that was a good number.
Ms. Walker?
Is this the appropriate time to ask about fund balance again or not? Are we going to do that at a different point?
Well, let's go through, finish going through this, and then we can come back if we have time to make sure we get through. So if you flip that page, I'm sorry.
No, I apologize, but to follow up with the ESSER funds, because that's where we
Okay.
were, if I may. So 279, what is our total employment with ESSER funds?
So if you look through, let's see,
So I see 279 at the bottom, but I'm
That's
just changed.
71
Yeah.
positions.
That's the ones that ESSER next to it.
Okay.
yeah, if you add up all the ones that have ESSER next to it,
And
then
that's in
that's
the
your
whole
net.
county.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
71 Esra.
Is that how many it is?
Roughly 71.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's down from how many Ezra last year? 120, 125?
Yeah, I think there were 129, 128 last year, something like that. So we were able to reduce some, but we weren't able to get to where we wanted to be. And so if you flip over, you had asked to see the different categories and the percent change so that you could compare the reductions in the different categories or different areas. So I hope that's helpful, what I've provided there. The reason I included the category on that front page is so that you could kind of see how I was grouping things together when you were looking on the second page. And I'm just going to give you about 3 minutes. I know that was a lot to just kind of look through, and then we can discuss a little bit more. Okay, now that everyone's had a moment to just kind of look through that document, are there any questions that we can try to answer for you, or would you like to move on to the non-salary items?
Ms. Walker?
I have a question, I know this is Ashley got to answer to Dr. Faust. Like, when these eventually have to be done, like whatever we want to call it, are they going to come from, I just hope they're not going to come from schools that need them the most. I mean, I know some of our neater schools they have like other sources of funding, which I'm not really sure if they can or can't fund. Like, there's like 4 potential positions in school administration. I mean, can the schools that need them the most be able to find funding to keep, because we talk a lot about,
Walk up and talk
the
about
reason I
what you
ask
want.
that is because we talk a lot about strong leadership and a culture in our schools, and that's important to some of our high priority schools. But if we have to cut them, that's going to hurt
Yeah.
the school.
The formula that we're looking at is based on student enrollment, but I'll let Chris.
And they do have different pots of money. Some have CSI dollars and new title dollars. They can shift money around to purchase certain things that will free up others. So they can be, to a sense, creative with how they select what they're going to do with it. But it's just be within the parameters of what the federal guidelines state. But they do have more flexibility than a traditional school that does not have CSI dollars or title dollars.
So could they use like federal money for positions, like AP positions?
They could, so for instance, they may not use it for an AP position, but they could buy teacher positions then with a lot of, so they can, it's almost like you are, I hate to use the word barter, but they are,
Yeah.
they're able to swap out and say, I'm gonna pay for this with it, then that's gonna release money for me.
Trump card.
Ma'am, do you have-
No,
I don't know. It felt like it was answered.
So I guess I'm coming back to my question before on the special programming and the, I can see how we can move maybe AIG teachers around a little bit and instructional coaches because their licensures are broader. But I'm coming back to the EC stuff that are federally funded, and you said we're putting those off till later to discuss. So because they're federally funded, do we still pay them the same supplement that everybody
Yes.
else gets?
Yes.
Okay, so then where are all those costs absorbed?
So think of it as a grant, honestly. So you write a grant, we get money from the feds. They say you're gonna get $5 million or $7 million. So you purchase all of those individuals and absorb their salary, but you still gotta offer everything. So it may not, that 7 million may not be enough. So then Ashley has to then go over to the local side and make up the difference.
So we will use local dollars to make up that.
I don't know that that's a true statement. So,
When you're,
in the past, that's what
Oh,
we've
in the
done.
past,
In the
okay.
past, that's
Yeah, I'm
what
like,
we've
wait a
done. But
minute.
this, I'm talking about for like next year.
Next
I don't know if
year. Oh,
there'll
yeah,
be
next year.
local
Wait a minute.
money to make up the
what have we been
difference.
doing?
Yeah.
Yes.
So in the past, yes. Current year, yes. Next year, I'm not
Can't do it
sure.
next
I won't
year.
have money, fund balance to appropriate like I did this year. But I just want to make sure we're clear. So we actually use local money, state money, and federal money for EC. So there's 3 different pots of money that we use to fund that program.
And part of balancing this out and right-sizing the organization involves sort of sharing the load a little bit. We'll never say that a school is overstaffed. We're never going to see that a program is overstaffed. But there is, to the extent, to whom much is given, much is required. There are places that we're going to have to right-size a little bit, and that's going to not be the same for every school. We can't just say each school loses one person, because some schools were staffed differently than others.
Well, and that goes back to my question on earlier, if the number of our EC students is increasing, and yet we need to decrease the number of teachers, in that, how do we cover the needs,
So
that the federal government's gonna require? And maybe I just don't understand it well enough,
Right,
but
so
I'm trying to
internally,
read
we have
more.
to make sure that everyone has a caseload. That's where we have to start.
Okay,
And then you have to make sure, there may be times where it's like, well, I have 10 kids on my caseload, but I need to go over to Mr. Wildebor's school and pick up some kids to support over there.
Okay.
Where that has not been something that we have tapped into. That's what some districts do. That's what
looking at
so we have to look at,
strategically-
so we have not strategically looked, so I don't want us to go all the way down that road.
Okay.
Because I don't think we're ready to get there, but we're looking specifically at the funding sources. We're not looking for the board to resolve of how an EC teacher looks at their caseload.
Oh, no, and I don't want to be in
Right,
that.
I don't want us to discuss that, because that, everyone will have their own type of how we fix it. I want us, this is a conversation of how do we make sure that we can balance the budget. So we don't look at it, as she was saying, for instance, state just gives us positions, those state allotments, they'll give us those positions, and we then have to figure out, oh, well, now we have enough out of federal. So federal, we've replenished. There's some other grants, and it's like, there are other grant dollars, but that's all still federal. And then what we've done in the past is said, oh, here's local, and that's how we would make it up. So what we're saying right now is cancel out that local. We have state, and we have federal, and we have some grants that actually come, we call it funding in the rear, basically. But we can't start them off with more because we won't have that start off because, and that's where I've been talking with other superintendents and some of our legislators. When you approve your budget, the General Assembly approves their budget in November or October, we've been running school since July 1. And so we have to make payroll, you know, for July, for August, for September, for October, and even for November. And what we've been doing that with this year is with fund balance to make sure, because then it would drop, but then what was happening is it didn't, all of it didn't drop, so we didn't get it all. So that's for, I guess that's a quick.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, I'm not trying to
Oh, no.
even imply that I understand how to allot. I'm just looking, I'm way up here just trying to look at that. I know that you guys know how to make those decisions.
We'll be level setting a lot across caseloads, and there will be caseload increases. There will, just like there are going to be caseload increases across the board for every position type thing. And so that's going to be felt. It's definitely going to be felt.
Ms. Barnhart and then Mr. McManus.
I mean, I'm looking at the percentage change and the total position change that we're looking at. While I understand every single person on this list are people's livelihood, and so I say this lightly, but I know that I had expressed a desire of the administrators, so I'm grateful to see central office cuts here too. I know that's initially when conversations happen, to be had to say, to do our best to try to not touch as many student direct-facing positions as possible. So I can see that on this list. The one that is giving me a lot of concern and seeing the state allotment is the instructional support, and we talked about that, the media coordinators, counselors, and social workers. That's a significant jump down as far as the percentage change, and so again, I don't know if there's a way that we can look into how the community can support. I don't know if it's a way of an MOU difference, but to see how we can potentially get those supports elsewhere if we have to cut them out of our budget. So
let me help you with that. Ashley and I've spoken with Chris, so I'll take this question. What we have to present to you, board, is if no one resigns, no one retires.
Okay.
Because we have to use those as planning numbers. So we can't say that, oh, X individuals. So this is worst case scenario.
Okay.
That's why we're not, we're middle of February. Wow, middle of February. But by the end of March, we will have a different set of numbers. So this will change because X amount of people will have their 30 plus years, they retire, and someone's moving somewhere else. And so then you start to then put in individuals. So I don't want us to go too far down the road. There's some other things that have to take place, but we have to keep you informed of how it works. It's hard to create a budget. It really is. Because again, this is worst case scenario. If all the employees said, I'm not retiring this year, I'm not moving anywhere, I'm not gonna take another job anywhere, and everyone decides to stay, that's what that number would have to be.
Well, and the follow-up with that, I'm sorry, Mr. Littleworth, is I know that the endowment is going to a rolling grant cycle. And so obviously looking where we're potentially, I understand what you're saying, haven't done it yet, this is the worst case scenario. We did not receive a lot of the endowment ask. We received one of the many, many endowment asks that we had. And so I don't know if there's a targeted plan that we have as far as potentially helping with some of these, but I'd like to know that too, because it's probably gonna be open up very soon.
So they would need to change how they afford, like the application process, meaning that it doesn't say that I could not put instructional support in there, because it's more of enhancing what you already have, and then it's supporting. And then in order to write I still wouldn't be able to fund the position, because it would be, I would have to say that I need, I'm making this number up because it's not on there, 14 X positions for this. Well, I may not know when, so it's kind of hard with those grants, but they would have to, their application process would all have to change for us in order to get those, because in those grants that we applied for, there weren't positions that we were looking for. It was actual programs for enhancement that we were doing.
Mr. McManus?
You answered the question about matriculation, because we hadn't mentioned that lately. I think this board's going to be digging more so than many boards maybe have not done for many years because of where we are or where we aren't. And so I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate to hear everybody discuss and ask questions. So we're all getting an education. We really are. The last thing I'd like to say is I think we need to make sure that when we make a final priority list and have to make final decisions based on everything we have at that time, that we consider all programs equally so that we're not projecting, taking the hit on one or two because of a personal and or professional bias. And that's hard to do when you're doing something like this. But whether kids are at the top or at the bottom or in the middle, we have to consider everybody. And we've got to be very careful, I think, once we make that call, that people can say, well, they did their best to treat everybody the same. And to me, that's one of the most important things we'll have to make sure we're aware of as we make these decisions.
Thank you, Mr. McManus. Mr. Bradford? Ms. Walker?
I'm just still digesting, but as I look at this, I see that on the grand total line, in the worst case scenario, that number there, and then I just add the two that have the word teacher in front of them, and it's a percentage, it's a large percentage of the overall number. And we had said we want to keep the forward facing with the students at a minimum, but this is the largest. If my math is right, it's 119 and a half out of 279.
So are you saying the teachers, the 5.6% reduction?
Yeah, and the 24.3 on
And the
TAs.
teacher assistants, 24.3. And that includes the EC teacher assistants in that teacher assistant number. So all of that's not regular ed, that includes EC teacher assistants as well.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Can we back that out just so we know what it is? It's on the front page, right?
So the reason why she put it is to categorize everyone. So it's like to say teacher versus teacher assistant versus bus driver. It's how it's categorized and to help her when she's putting numbers, because when we're doing a cost analysis, she's able to put that number in, or there's more, like if when she's doing her calculations, I guess, we're looking at the position. that's in here.
We were trying to look at total for different categories of positions to give you the percentage.
So on a positive note, I'm thrilled that bus drivers, bus monitors, and custodians will stay the same.
Same, me too.
Welcome.
Thank you. Well, I guess my questioning was on the line of the last question, which was, looks like 160 front-facing positions, teacher and teacher assistants mixed in there with EC. I don't know that we can do that. I mean, the word on the street that I've heard is there's not enough human resource support in a classroom, so I'm really struggling with, obviously, we don't know where those will come from right now, but, and to the point about the endowment, I mean, the downside is there's a change in leadership, so we've had a person that's been in our community listening to us and hopefully building some kind of, rapport with the district, and we're letting them know what we need, but that's not there anymore, so I don't know how we're gonna ask for things from them. And then you've got that added bonus of losing 7 million to charter schools. So I don't know, does it get much worse? I'm not really sure. If we can lose that many front-facing positions, can we, Dr. Feld?
Add those two together.
I mean, we have to clearly, right? We want to balance the budget.
And so what we
No, that
always
adds
say
percentage to them,
is,
then I
if
think
you
69.
back that number out and say no to that, then we have to find it
Right.
somewhere else. But what we have to say is that it has to equate to that same dollar amount to back you out of the ESSER dollars and then the local dollars. So it may not, if the board says, hey, we don't want to do that one, then we just have to find a category that has that dollar amount.
Or get additional funding.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah. Remember, worst case scenario.
Yes.
This is worst case
Yes.
scenario.
But again, this is, as you said, worst case scenario, so this would be with the same funding that the county commissioners give us now,
Right.
without any increases, correct?
Correct.
So, we need to get our e-pads out. Yes.
Food for thought. This might not be the perfect time, but I gotta say it. Do we need to look at a grant writer
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Something.
after all said and done to try to bring in as much as we can? We've not had that. I think I've brought that up before, but that might be something we really need to add, if that's a possibility.
But at the expense of what? They're not cheap.
Well, that's part of the discussion. Good
Well, you're
question.
weighing the, the fact that a grant writer has that specific skill, and they get a lot more grant money when you have not a dedicated, you're sharing, but you have somebody that's got the expertise, a winning track record with writing grants, and that's, if with the endowment we didn't get, if we're missing grant money, if we're not winning it, then we have to look at getting a better grant writer than what we're doing. I don't know, what are you doing now, department heads? Is that who writes your grants?
We've gotten a lot of,
I've written 2 or 3 in the last year.
We've gotten grants.
Right.
but just not being down there. Well, one, but.
All right, Ms. Sutton, you want to carry on? 'Cause we are
Okay,
about a half hour.
so next we've got another handout.
I got you covered.
So this is our non-salary, so what we're passing out now is excluding positions. So we just finished the position summary sheet, so now we'll talk about budget excluding those positions.
Because like Head Start is a grant.
You have so many.
I'm going to give you a few minutes
What
to
is
look
it,
at
Ashley?
this, but I want to talk through the format of the document. So once again, these are non-salary budget lines. This is going to be just state and local funding. And the first column gives you your fund. So like, for example, 10 means state. The second column is your program. So for example, 12 means driver's ed. And then there's a budget code there where I've summarized so the document wouldn't be so large. And then I've got account description there summarizing those accounts. And then I've got the current year budget, so the 2024 budget column is our current year budget. And then a change column. And then the last column is a 2025 budget, so that's the budget for next year. So this is just a draft at this point. We're still working through this, but this is where we're at so far. And after each program, you're going to see a total, and so that's really how we manage our budgets, is by program. And so you'll see a bold line that gives you total, so you can kind of skim through and just look for those bolds in the change column to see increases and decreases in the different programs. I'm going to give you a few minutes to look at it yourself, and then I wanted to point you in a couple of areas and then give you some time to ask some questions. So let's do about 3 minutes again.
And 20 would be local.
Yes, and 20 is going to be local.
It's hard without knowing the codes, what you're looking at.
So she says 10 is state and 20 is local.
Okay.
You can use the account description. That'll tell you what you're looking at. And then, like I said, state is going to start with a 10 and local is going to start with a 20. And we can certainly go through and I'll answer any questions once we get to the discussion period.
We didn't have it, now we do. Okay.
Consider operating expenses. These considered operating expenses.
Are we okay to proceed, or do you want a few more minutes?
Is there a place that you could, you know, after this meeting, look up what the program codes are?
Yes, and we'll go through and I'll
Okay,
share that with you when we go through too.
because a lot of these are repeats, but,
Yep,
I mean, as far as the description goes,
right.
you know, like supplies.
So what I wanted to do is, I'm going to point out some big ticket items, and then we'll go back to the front and we'll go through and see if you had any questions. And the team and I together will try to answer any questions you have. So first, I wanted to have you flip over to local. So if you go to page 4. There's a large increase in program 56. It's about mid-page. 56 is transportation. It's yellow buses, page 4. So it's about $1.1 million increase there, and that's because we had a decrease in our state transportation funding. And so we've moved those expenses to local to continue to be able to operate at the same level to provide those services for transportation.
Is that because our our efficiency changed because of our bus routes?
I'm going to let Eddie answer that question.
That is, I'm not sure, I'd have to go back and look and see why the state, they actually took back some funds from last year, so we're forecasting the equal amount of funds this year. Our efficiency rating is around 98%, so it's the highest in the, right. But they have cut us back in funding, and I think it's just a realignment or adjustments in gas prices as well. Fuel.
So, and of course, if the state revenue comes in higher, then we would adjust, you know, and we would move any local budget up to state as we could. But at this point, I don't feel comfortable assuming that the state money would come in because we had such a large reduction this year.
Ms. Mason?
Under that, the equipment purchase, was that the new bus that we just recently got? That was your grant, 87,000? That was a grant, okay.
It's multi-year. So we didn't pay, so everyone knows, we didn't pay anything for that bus.
Okay.
Nothing.
So this 87 million is, oh, it's capitalized.
87,000.
Oh, sorry. Liza.
So the next item I wanted to bring your attention to is program 69 is right under that. There's a total, and that's actually a decrease of 1.2. And so we're going to reduce our nursing contract. And so I wanted you to be aware of that because that is a big decrease, and I wanted you to know what that amount was. Are there any questions about that?
I would like to ask a question on that one. Basically, does that mean we're not going to have one nurse per school? Is that what?
Yes. And that contract includes nursing and school-based mental health, but that kind of ties into the question Ms. Barnhart had earlier about MOUs with partners for school-based mental health options, but it will be the reduction in both of those.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I thought there was legislation that expanded to have school nurses at all sites, so is that not, that's not the case? Okay.
Ms. Walker?
So we did, I just want some clarification. So we did receive an additional category where the state is tracking health services separately, but we use all of that funding for our speech.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Walker?
So I guess my question is, I thought they were funded by, our nurses were funded by the county, yes or no?
So the county employs our school nurses and our school-based mental health staff, and we pay them for those staff.
Okay. Is there a reason we're reducing just because we're trying to cut, or it's not because we don't have the need? Because I know we do.
So, again, it's kind of right-sizing as well. Looking at, it doesn't mean that we don't see needs. It means that it's the right sizing across all services. And in comparison with other districts our size, looking at what those student to school nurse ratios are, and then looking at honestly what we can afford.
But that doesn't, we wouldn't be paying their social security or their,
Well, we pay a contracted amount, which is what the county tells us it costs for them to.
they do, we do.
How many positions are that?
So we've, I'd have to look at exactly how many positions that is, but it's a drop of approximately 10 to 12.
Another question? Sutton?
And then right under, you see Program 131 total. That is, you're seeing an increase of $1.6 million there, and that is for our curriculum. So ESSER was paying for that curriculum, and now we're going to need to pick that up locally if we were going to continue to have that.
Mr.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's ESSER paying for the, like, for example, the Witten Wisdom? That money came out of ESSER?
Yeah.
Yes.
So last year, Witten Wisdom, we paid, of course, we adopted it. And so we paid for curriculum, about 4.8, and we're dropping down, to only pay 1.8 overall, but a lot of that was in ESSER. So we reduced our sustainability, but because so much was in ESSER, we still have to pick it up in local. Did I say that right, actually? Okay.
Then if you want, I'm sorry, was there another question?
No, I think
We're
that's
good?
ours. Wanted to see.
If you go down to page 5, about midway, you start to see Program 802, and that is going to be our maintenance program. And at the top, you see utility costs there, so you see some big increases in that area. This is just to continue to be able to pay these utility bills that they just continue to go up, and so we needed this increase. This is what we had to appropriate funds the past 2 years to help pay for utilities, so we really need to build it into the budget this year so that we know that we've got enough to cover that. And so that's the majority of the increase that you see in maintenance there, but I wanted to make sure you saw those large increases, because I think, yeah, that looks like it's about 1.6 million related to utilities.
Graybill?
So Ashley, this isn't going to affect any of these reductions, looking at the things you've listed, any of our preventive maintenance programs that we just, because.
No,
Okay.
we're just reducing by looking at programs, bringing some things in-house, and basically just being more efficient.
Okay. Thank you.
The next large item that I wanted to bring your attention to is page 9. Program 857, so that's finance. And if you look, it's almost middle of the page, you'll see liability insurance, property insurance. And so our property insurance is increasing. It actually increased in this year. And so this is just to be able to continue the same coverage that we have this year with the property insurance. And then there's also an increase for judgments and settlements. We haven't had enough budgeted in that line in the past couple of years, and so we really need to get that up. And to be honest, getting it up to 50,000 probably isn't high enough, because we know we just had a settlement. That was just one settlement was that much. So we really need that increase to help us out with that budget.
Mr. Woodward?
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Graybill?
So this judgments and settlements, that is for all things, like any student cases or flooring that wasn't right, or all that kind of stuff?
Well, if it's capital related, usually there's insurance, or we would have some kind of maintenance agreement. Like if something were to go wrong after they finish the work. You want to speak to that one, Eddie?
Right, we can, we would go back to our contracts and, you know, if it was a product failure, then, you know, we could, work with the contractors and their subs to fix those.
Okay, so the judgments were more like lawsuits filed
Yes,
against us?
yes, that's
Okay.
exactly right.
Okay.
Mr. McManus?
Could you tell us what that lawsuit amount is as of today?
I do not have that in front of me.
Ms. Bradford?
So just trying to get a big picture of this, this is all, this is everything, right?
Insurance.
No, I'm talking about this. This is all of the programs, or there's some that.
So these are non-salary, local and state.
So not federal grants.
Right.
So not federal, capital, child nutrition, restricted funds like donations and grants that don't run through DPI.
And we can go somewhere and look up what all these programs are? Or do you have a table? for
Yeah,
me?
I can send you the table. We've got a few minutes, so I could go back to page 1, and I could tell you the programs are about.
But before you do that.
Yes.
I think it'd be easier if you just sent that, so that we're
Okay.
not having to.
Yes, I can
To
do
write
that.
that one. But I also wanted to bring the attention to 2 lines above the property insurance. We're still on page 9, to look at the liability insurance. And that $1.2 million, $1,294,102, that is our, lost the word, that we pay,
Our general liability.
that's our general liability for,
Is that
that's a
Liberty?
premium, sorry.
Is that Liberty? Liberty?
Liberty,
Right.
that's specifically to Liberty, and
Our
so,
premiums.
that's our premium, that's the word I was looking for. That's what we pay just for insurance, which increased the year before. So we're at 1.2, and that's what we are budgeting for. So just as an understanding, that, we pay a lot of money in insurance.
But that's Liberty, that's Liberty's premium right there.
That's the only one that bid it on us, that would accept the bid. No one else. When we put it out to bid, no other company would accept us, and that was the premium that they brought back at $1.2 million to carry us.
And at this point, I'm not aware of an increase, but of course, if there is an increase, I would have to come back because I wouldn't have funding for an increase.
I just want to make sure, so we're paying $1.2 million to get $4 million of insurance.
Yeah, I'm doing that math right now myself.
Is that right?
The math
But
is
that's
not
the only
mathing.
person, so we could have no insurance.
Sorry?
So we could have no insurance.
Well,
Well, that's
I'm
not-
just making sure I understood that correctly. Okay.
Wow.
Ms. Graybill?
Where does workers' comp insurance fall in there?
So workers' comp isn't showing up because it's coded like a benefit, so you're not seeing it on this sheet, but I can provide that.
I'm just curious if our workers' comp
And,
benefit.
and
our
unemployment
premiums
too,
have
maybe.
gone up.
Of course they have.
That's crazy, yeah. A 1 plus through.
Of course they have.
$1 million policy.
It goes up. Any other questions real quick? We have about, just a reminder, we have about 10 minutes.
So if you have a specific question, then if you'll let me know page and program number, I can tell you what that program number is, and we can talk from there. And if we need to, we can bring this back to the next work session since we haven't really had time to go through it in as much detail as we have the other items.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
last question.
Absolutely. Mr. McManus?
I'm trying to figure out how to ask the question I'd like to ask. Is it, as we look at every possible decision that we have to make, is it possible for us, just so we can at least wrap our hands around it, each program, let's say maintenance is a major programs, a school major program, or a staffing, and what % of our total budget goes to that program? So let's say X program is 10% of our budget. It would be reasonable in addition to the administrators, but for that person in charge of that arena to say, okay, we need to look at 10% cuts ourselves because we are 10% of the total budget. At least gather more info.
And that is kind of what we did when
Okay.
we went
So, yeah,
through the
that's
departments.
So yes, I sat with every one of these, and so these are, we're at bare bones. So that change column is where we had them go back, and some had to go back a couple times, and we are gonna have to go back again. So that's where we're saying this change column, that's where they've taken a look at contracts, and saying, Faust, this is, we can't.
Everything is on this.
So it's
Yeah.
really,
This
it's
is-
both those documents. It's the position summary that you received that had the central office, and then it's also the non-salary that we're looking at now. So the two things
Oh, yeah.
together.
That you've done
So
that with.
this is the other side of the budget. So what you saw were the people side.
Right.
This is the side where, to make it run. And yes, everyone sitting at this table, they know that, today, when we're in central staff, we're gonna be talking about, all right, you gotta peel back some more. And so when we're talking about having to increase on site, that's what's, I'll be honest with you, that's what's draining our budget. This is what gets us. You have this, the, $1 million more or so for insurance, and it's not that you've done anything wrong. Inflation has happened. And so you looking to see how much we spend on, I go back to just the insurance alone, to keep the lights running, the AC going in these buildings. That has increased from now versus 2020. And then you add in all of those raises that go along. We just can't sustain it because we don't have, remember, we don't generate revenue. Well, food nutrition does. But you can't use their money, it can only be used for food nutrition. And so we are dependent upon the state, the Fed, and the local. And because things have become so expensive, we're feeling that. And we're trying to do some of the same things with the least amount of, right now, programs. And so we have to go back this afternoon and look at more programs and cut, and they don't like it, and I'm like, okay, well, in order to make it work, you're gonna have to go and look at a program. So I get it, everyone would want certain things, and we're bringing it to you so that you can say, okay, well, this is an untouchable. And if it's an untouchable, the board says it's untouchable, then we've gotta find another dollar amount with that's equal in another program.
Ms. Bradford, then Ms. Barnhart.
Page 4, 069, I think I'm gonna guess what that is, but can you tell me which program that is?
Yep. So page 4, program 69 is at-risk funding, and we're using that to pay for SROs and the nursing contract.
So we're paying $69,914 as our contribution to the SROs. We have one in every school.
Right.
At least.
Right, and if Julie can correct me, but I believe that's for the middle and high schools. And we get additional state funding that helps cover the elementary. Am I
It's a
saying that
grant.
correct?
Yeah, that we apply for every year.
Ms. Barnhart, then Ms. McManus.
So my clarification, and I think what I'm understanding Mr. McManus asking is, in this budget, are all of our programs included, like the Lyceum program, the IB program, the
Yes.
CRA at
You'll
Mosley?
see all of those.
So they're in here. So that's what I was under the impression, that's what he was asking for, the percentage of those programs running that we have operating in the school and how it relates to the full budget. Did I misunderstand you, Mr. McManus?
Well, that would be inclusive of anything, but part of anything.
That's correct, and if you go to page
11.
11, at the
Program
top is
862.
program 862. That's, program 862 is our high school signature program. And so I know that probably looks a little strange, but the 2024 column is how the school separated out their budget. We ran this report as of sometime in December. But the 2025 is how we actually do the initial allocation. We give each one 20,000, and then they can move it around. They have the flexibility to move it around to best meet their needs.
Okay.
Ms.
Thank you.
McManus, then Ms. Walker.
For my own understanding, I may have missed this somewhere, out of our 162 local teaching positions, and we pay just all their salaries, et cetera. Do we also pay that supplement?
Yes,
A $9,000 supplement that came from the county?
that's an average, yes.
So we pay that on the local.
Right, we actually pay the local supplement for all of our locally paid and state paid employees,
So that's about
certified
$1.5
staff.
million
Um,
at least.
Yeah,
9,000.
actually, if you go to, oh, it's not, sorry, it's not in here. Yeah, so,
I took 162 multiplied by 9,000.
Yeah.
That's how the whole board's going.
yeah.
So my question is, I'm not trying
And
to
that
upset
doesn't
them, just
include
we're
benefits.
trying to dig a hole everywhere we can to find money. Would the county commissioners consider paying that close to $2 billion since they gave it to the state teachers who, the state doesn't care what you make, they pay for it regardless of. That would help us a great deal, about $1.5 million.
Well, if you made the ask and explained it.
I'm throwing up
in this
everything we can think of, so
rational way.
it just hit me.
I mean, yeah, I definitely think we should
Because
come
we assumed
together.
that $1.5 billion right now,
Yeah.
just for local, for the like that they gave to the, they gave.
Yeah, it's all in the way.
Was more than that if you multiply everyone.
Yeah, because it's not just teachers, it's all of our certified staff.
Just
Right, and it's not just locally paid, it's state paid as well.
We have just a minute or two left. Ms. Walker had her hand up, and then Ms. Craybill, and that'll finish us up.
So this is operating expenses, this does include the program of Mosley, or the school of Mosley?
Yes.
Okay.
Which one, what number are they?
So it's spread out, it's not gonna be in a specific number, we pay for out of different pots, but the salaries are not included in here.
Right.
But the supplies related to the program, are included.
So I guess that follow-up.
So the
was-
big expenses for that program's not here, I guess is what I'm saying, because it's in
Right,
salaries.
and so we did get support, I think, from some commissioners on Mosley, so I would imagine they would look at this and go, yes, we will help fund Mosley. I mean, there was a resolution done, so. I did have a question on fund balances, I don't know, we should save that for another time, because I asked it earlier, but it wasn't the appropriate time to talk about fund balance.
So what was,
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the fund balances, we're gonna be essentially left with just over $1 million after the budget gets approved. And we discussed that the norm is between 6% and 8%, even though we're not mandated to have a fund balance. Are we gonna have discussions with commissioners about raising our fund balances? I know at one point it was too high, they felt, but at some point we have to have this rainy day fund money, should we get a storm or something like that. Are we gonna have that discussion, Dr. House?
So.
Or do we need to have the discussion?
Right, I think the board has to have it, but I think if I'd say the eye of the tiger needs to be on the sustainability.
Right.
That way, so how do we sustain? And then I think that will come about in a couple of years, because you would have to ask well above in order to get that percent. And our question, as we're creating this budget, is how can we balance it for the 24, 25? So you can balance it, but then next year you're gonna have to cut some, you're gonna have to keep cutting. And then, I think those are really great conversations to have with the county, because what happened, that fund balance didn't get to, I think in 2020, it was like 18 million.
Yeah.
It didn't get to 18 million in 1 year. It was like
No,
years over time, and then they said, spend it down.
Right,
And
but I would
so-
argue the sustainability conversation should include fund balance, because it's, I mean, maybe as a CPA accountant, whatever your financial, I mean, it's just responsible to have one. It just-
Ms. Craybill, and Ms. Bradford.
Yeah, so, this pie chart that we got, is it possible to do a pie chart like that and break it down to each of the areas of responsibility of our assistant superintendents so that we can see, where the money's like curriculum, like you know, chief accountability officer, operations, and he, of course, you know, he's got all these sub-departments and, you know, human resources and, student support services. Do what? I meant all the folks that report to Dr. Faust that have to sit down with him and do the zero base.
So your biggest large budget is gonna be Eddie, and then it's gonna be Julie.
Well, and that's very easy to figure out, you know, by looking, but I would
Dawn.
like to kind of just see that a little bit in there, and then,
can I just get some
Yeah.
clarification? So would we just be talking about the local operating budget? You want to see that just for the local operating, or how do you want?
I guess I
All the
want to, yeah, I
programs?
guess our local operating budget.
Okay.
Because what I'm trying to, put things together with is, all right, so we have this strategic plan that said, and I never saw, and maybe I missed it, on how each one of us voted, for what's first, what's second, what's third. And what I saw was that safety was number one. And safety includes not only physical, changes and safety, but safety also includes student mental health, and yet we're cutting, and this, I brought this up last year too, where we continue to cut in those areas where we hear all of these problems, that our students and our staff are still facing, for whatever reason. So I want to see us put things together, match them with our strategic plan, and would like to see how we all voted on those. And then kind of take a look at more of these pie charts, like with, operations has 3 different areas. Can we break it down into, child nutrition, maintenance, whatever, all of the things that you have, transportation, those kinds of things. And versus, Ms. Barnum's department has student support services, they have the EC program, to see how that's all broken down so that we know that when we are going to be authorizing whatever you suggest, we'll kind of have a feel for the impact of all of us. I'm just such a visual, pie wrapper instead of looking at these kind of things. Is that something that we can do?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, board member, we are actually at 12:02 at this point, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just before you motion to adjourn, this is no question, but for them, I see number 2 on the last page, the budget work session, February 29th. I thought that work session was for our town halls. So are we having a?
Oh, that's my mistake.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
That's my mistake.
Ms. Bradford?
Can you tell us real quick, the way to increase the fund balance, it's just almost like an attrition in the other way. For example, you told me if I didn't use my travel expenditures, that could just end up in the fund balance at the end of the period. What other ways do we get money in the fund balance?
Basically, the fund balance is your leftover.
Okay.
So what
Yeah.
you don't spend, they give you, and if, the revenue that they give is more than what we spend, then it goes over to fund balance.
So if we're not having the work session for the budget on the 29th, when do we expect our next budget work session-ish?
Because we would like to bring something to the board, a recommendation for approval in April. So if we need to have another board meeting or budget work session, then we would need to get that scheduled, I would think, before
Nothing between now and then?
sometime,
I'd say probably
I
early
guess, in
March.
March.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
okay.
mean, I don't want to go all the way
I'll
to
work with Ms.
recommendations.
Bowie, and we'll get some dates out to everyone.
Yep,
No, we were saying that we want to bring the final budget to you in April, so
Right.
you have from now up until to.
Right, that's what I was trying to get
No,
at.
that's what I was doing
Yeah.
clear to get someone to say.
oh, right.
March.
Again, board members, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So I didn't get clear on what we're doing.
But, as I said, Bowie and I will send out dates very soon, and we will look at early March.
So moved.
We have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
First and second, any discussion? If not, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That's 7-0, we are adjourned.